I've been hearing about the John Gotti movie for years, you know, like it was like John Travolta's going to make a John Gotti movie, two Johns, John Travolta, John Gotti, whatever, John Frankenheimer. There's a lot of Johns in the world. And one John was making a movie about the other John, and I had this compulsion to go see it. You know, all the reviews are the bad. It's the worst movie of the year, the worst reviewed movie of the decade. And that immediately says I must go out and see this before it goes out of the theaters. I must rush out and see Gotti. And it was not an easy task, you know. I mean, this film opened in like 500 theaters last week. And I'm sure it's going to go out of the theaters in, you know, another week or so. I was amazed that this is week 2 that I saw it, and I was able to catch a screening at a Regal. Because, I mean, there's like 20 companies behind this movie. There's 20 or 30 companies, and then MoviePass was involved in this company. I guess MoviePass has a relationship with Regal Cinemas. So I think this movie is almost exclusively playing in Regal Cinemas around the country. So it's playing here in Austin. It's playing right, and by the time you watch this movie, it may not even. I mean, tomorrow they may just, you know, they may execute this movie from the theaters, but it's playing right now. As of this Friday, in one theater in Austin, real far away from me, the Regal Cinemas Metropolitan, a real nice big theater, but like it's like an old theater, maybe intentionally old looking. One of the older looking Regal Stadium theaters here in the area. It's got a nice facade, and you go in, it's got little weird, like, it's got a nice lobby, and then they've got, like, Cheeto popcorn, which is, like, a new innovation that I'm honestly interested in trying, and they've got, like those little dispensers with the little eggs where you can get things that are like, it's like from 1987, 1986. It had a very retro feel, you know, and so I was able to just barely get to the 5:30 showing of Gotti here on a Friday. 5 o'clock on Friday in Austin traffic. I was just like, got into it. And also in the lobby they have these weird poster things. I've never seen another Regal Cinema that have these things. Weird revolving poster things with slits, where it's like they have, I don't know, 3 posters, whatever, that they turn, and it's it's probably the worst invention I think anybody's ever come up with, because you can't see any of these posters. A weird movie, the story of the gangster John Gotti in production for years and years and years. John Travolta was going to play it, and now it was almost like, is this movie ever going to be made? You know, and then it started to shoot, and people are like, is this really being shot? Is it? I mean, it was a bizarre thing, but it was with John Gotti, Travolta playing Gotti, and his wife Kelly Preston playing Gotti's wife. And it's a great role for her. There's a lot of histrionics. There's a lot of yelling and shouting. You know, she comes in shouting and yelling, and every time she meets with John Gotti Sr. in the prison, she's yelling and screaming. And at the end of the movie, she has to be taken out of the courtroom. She's yelling. So that was my favorite part of the movie. Just the yelling, the screaming, and the overall calamity of Kelly Preston as Mrs. Gotti. Wonderful film. It's a difficult movie to follow if you're not sure of the whole chronology of the life of John Gotti. This guy who started out as a street guy, made his way up in the Gambino crime family, was involved in tracking down the people who kidnapped and murdered Carlo Gambino's grandson, nephew, relative. Reminded me of the 7-Ups. I think the 7-Ups kind of took off, or a takeoff on that real life thing, and how he made his bones with that, and then the escalation of litigation from the government in the 80s and the 90s, and then his eventual death, and the involvement of John Gotti Jr. as the bullseye began to come on John Gotti Jr. I mean, this film is really the story, primarily the story of Gotti and his son. And you could see a film that could be made of this. You could make a movie kind of like The Bronx Tale, the tale of the fathers and sons and things like that. And the Gotti movie, in a way, tries to do that. It tries to be a high level kind of a thing. It tries to be like Goodfellas. It tries to be like The Godfather. It tries to be a little bit like Scarface, and it tries to be a little bit like The Bronx Tale, because this movie is kind of sanctioned by Gotti Jr. and really kind of shepherded by him. But it's a weird movie. It has a lot of old faces in it. A lot of if you're a fan of movies of the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, you'll recognize Stacy Keach as Dela Croce, and Neil Dela Croce, who was kind of like the guy that everybody wanted him to kind of lead the Gambino crime family, but the older Gambino put Paul Castellano in place, who was not a street guy, and so and the movie kind of but if you kind of haven't read a few of the mob books or watched a few of the John Gotti biographies, it's easy to get lost in this film, especially because most of what we know about John Gotti is we know John Gotti, we know Paul Castellano, we know Samuel Bolgravano, but then when you get into these kind of side guys like Angelo Ruggiero and the people who were surrounding John Gotti, the people who were surrounding John Gotti Jr., it's difficult to and Vinny the Chin Gigante, who shot Costello and made his bones that way, and then led his own family I kind of have read some of the books and kind of know what's going on, but it's still, for me, the film doesn't leave you a lot of landmarks. It's easy to get confused throughout the way. There are some scenes with, it's a low budget movie. It's been quoted as like $10 million, but there are some scenes which look like a $500,000 like independent film, and the whole vibe of the film, there's some, especially when they get to the Ravenite Social Club, which just looks like, where the fuck did they, it looks like the reality is that's probably, it was not some kind of gilded thing. It probably was very, Spartan, probably in real life, but it does kind of look very humble, and that's probably very realistic the way it really looked, I don't think the film makes too many faux pas in that regard, but again, I don't know that much that I could say, oh, that didn't look right, It's scored with, I love the first murder scene with John Gotti, which is scored to Smoke on the Water, and there's a lot of 70s and 80s like music pumping through this film, Pet Shop Boys, Duran Duran, Come Undone, and there's all, it's a real pulsing soundtrack throughout this film, but it was bizarre the kind of how low budget some of it looked, and yet it's a movie with John Travolta and Kelly Preston, and it's John Gotti biopic, but it's great seeing John Gotti, rather not John. It's great seeing Travolta in a theatrical film. I think the last thing I saw him in was the O.J. Simpson TV series, and he was, I think, excellent in that. But it's great to see him in a movie again, because he's still a movie star, and he has the charisma. Some will argue he's not as tough, he's not as this, he's not as that, as Gotti or whatever. But I'm a John Travolta fan through and through, and whatever. In John we trust, I guess. John and Travolta we trust, and. differences in I mean, Vinny the Chin Gigante. He seems like he's they cast a guy who looks like he's like 30 years old. That's fucking this guy. And so there's a little Sammy the Bull Gravano. I mean, he owns. I don't know. It's an interesting movie. You got to see it. It's just like one of those explosions that, you know, you gotta say, oh, yeah, I saw that. I watched Freddy Got Fingered in the theater. I watched this and that. I can't give it a thumbs down. I can't really give it a thumbs up. It's just I mean, I love mobster films. If you love mobster gangster movies, you know, you got to go see it. I think it's an interesting film. I can't, but it's so, there are parts of it that are just so incongruous. And I mean, it's written by Lem Dobbs, you know, who's a credible screenwriter, and co-written by Lem Dobbs and Leo Rossi. You know, Leo Rossi, who is in the movie. Again, another old school dude. You got Leo Rossi and Stacy Keach. You know, a couple of really old school actors showing up at different parts of this film, which is kind of another fun thing. So it's an interesting experience. It's an interesting movie. I mean, I've just gotten out of it. It's difficult for me to process all of. I mean, one thing that really surprised me is how, like, they show a lot of pictures of John Gotti Jr. and John Gotti, and it seems like these are pictures. They have like JPEG artifacts on them, and it seems like pictures they just downloaded from the internet. And then there's some other things which seems like they just took this off of YouTube. It's like. And it was very bizarre. It's like, you know, maybe they could have like maybe gotten the negative of this picture from somebody or scanned it, you know. Instead, I think they did in some cases, but there are other cases where it was like, wow, I see, like, you know, stair stepping on the you know, it's just like it was like a bizarre mix of this. Elements which feel like they should be in like a low budget movie, and then other stuff that's like, but there's John Travolta in it. It's like, whoa, you know. Oh my God. So there you go. Gotti, interesting. I don't think you have to worry about waiting because it's not showing in any movies. It's barely in it. Another thing is I waited till the second week because I would have actually seen this the first week, but I looked in Google and I was like Gotti movie showtimes, and it didn't show anything. It didn't show. I had to really search, and I looked at Fandango, and maybe Regal Cinema and Regal Cinema is not linked up to Fandango and Google and all, but I couldn't find this movie showing here. It took a lot of digging to realize, oh, it's showing at Regal Cinemas. And then I found it showing in literally one theater in Austin. So difficult to find, but yeah, it's not. I think it's only showing. I think they opened it in only 500 theaters. So it's you know, you're watching on video on demand or on cable. A little, how 2 months from now in the modern world, 2 months from now it's going to be on cable. So, but a weird mix of low budget John Travolta. The bookend structure of it with literally this guy talking, you know, the John Gotti character talking to the audience. I don't know if that really worked. It was very bizarre, but there are a lot of bizarre elements in this film. It almost felt like there was some moments in that Ravenite Club where there's this like synthesizer score, and it felt like some kind of HBO movie from the 90s, you know. It was very bizarre, and a lot of conflicting emotions, interest in the subject matter. But I think the A&E just did a great 2-part series on John Gotti Jr. and the life of John Gotti Jr. and John Gotti Sr. And it almost is a prerequisite to watch that before you watch the movie in order to just follow this thing, because there's so many threads and different characters that you kind of need a primer before you go and watch this movie. But interesting.